On January 28th, the Roman Catholic Church celebrates Saint Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century theologian who showed the Catholic faith is in harmony with philosophy and all other branches of knowledge. The son of Landulf, Count of Aquino, Saint Thomas Aquinas was born circa 1225 in Rocca Secca, Italy, near Aquino, Terra di Lavoro, in the Kingdom of Sicily. His mother, Theodora, was a Countess of Teano. Thomas's family members were descendants of Emperors Frederick I and Henry VI. Before Saint Thomas Aquinas was born, a holy hermit shared a prediction with his mother, foretelling that her son would enter the order of friars preachers, become a great learner, and achieve unequaled sanctity. Thomas had 8 siblings, and he was the youngest child. Following the tradition of the period, Saint Thomas Aquinas was sent to the Abbey of Monte Cassino to train among Benedictine monks when he was just 5 years old. Saint Thomas Aquinas remained at the monastery until he was 13 years old, when the political climate forced him to return to Naples. Thomas began his theological studies at the University of Naples in the fall of 1239. It is believed that Thomas was introduced to his philosophical influences, Aristotle, Averroes, and Maimonides at the university, where he also met John of St. Julian, a Dominican preacher who influenced him greatly. Thomas soon joined a new religious order known as the Order of Preachers, or the Dominicans, after their founder, Saint Dominic de Guzman, an order which placed an emphasis on preaching and teaching. Thomas's parents were none too pleased with his decision to join this new evangelical movement. In order to talk some sense into him, Thomas's mother sent his brothers to bring him to the family. Having resisted his family's wishes, he was placed under house arrest. A famous story has it that one day his family members sent a prostitute into the room where Thomas was being held prisoner. But Thomas drove her off with a fire iron. As the door slammed shut behind her, he traced a black cross on the door. That night, 2 angels appeared to him in a dream and strengthened his resolve to remain celibate. Eventually, Thomas's mother relented, and he returned to the Dominicans in the fall. Thomas went to study at the Faculty of the Arts at the University of Paris, where he is believed to have met Dominican scholar Albertus Mangus, the chair of theology, who was later canonized as a saint by the Church. Under the tutelage of Saint Albert the Great, Thomas subsequently earned his doctorate in theology. Thomas was quiet and seldom spoke at the university, leading other students to believe he was dim-witted. They started calling him the dumb ox. After reading Thomas's thesis and thinking it was brilliant, his professor, Saint Albert the Great, proclaimed, "We call this young man a dumb ox, but his bellowing in doctrine will one day resound throughout the world." By the time he was 23, Thomas was teaching alongside his mentor at the University of Cologne. After completing his education, Saint Thomas Aquinas devoted himself to a life of traveling, writing, teaching, public speaking, and preaching. Around the middle of the century, Thomas was ordained to the priesthood, in which he showed great reverence for the liturgy and skill as a homilist. Religious institutions and universities alike yearned to benefit from the wisdom of the Christian apostle. Combining traditional principles of theology with modern philosophic thought, Thomas's treatise touched upon the questions and struggles of medieval intellectuals, church authorities, and everyday people alike. Thomas believed that people could have both faith and reason, and said that both kinds of knowledge came from God, so it was all right to have both. This theory is called scholasticism, and his work popularized this theory. He believed that people could prove that God existed in 5 ways, including understanding that cause and effect was all under God's control. All movement in the world came from God, and that human intelligence was a gift from God. He also believed that God was all-powerful, and that people could earn admission into heaven by abiding to moral and government laws. He had lots of followers and people who agreed with him, so he was very influential, both while he was alive and for centuries after his death. Thomas continued to teach and write till 1272, and it was during this time that he wrote his most famous works, Summa Theologica and De Virtutibus and De Aeternitate Mundi. He later established the university in Naples and took the regent master post. In 1273, Thomas was seen by the sacristan to be crying and levitating in prayer before an icon of the crucified Christ at the Dominican convent of Naples in the chapel of St. Nicholas. During this prayer, Christ is said to have told him, "You have written well of me, Thomas. What reward would you have for your labor?" Thomas replied, "Nothing but you, Lord." Following this exchange, something happened, but Thomas never wrote or spoke of it. Thomas refused to write any more. When begged to return to work, he replied, "I cannot, because all that I have written seems like straw to me." In January 1274, Saint Thomas Aquinas embarked on a trip to Lyon, France, on foot to serve on the Second Council, but he never made it to his destination. Along the way, he fell ill at the Cistercian monastery of Fossa Nova, Italy. The monks wanted St. Thomas Aquinas to stay at the castle, but sensing that his death was near, Thomas preferred to remain at the monastery, saying, "If the Lord wishes to take me away, it is better that I be found in a religious house than in the dwelling of a layperson." Often called the universal teacher, Saint Thomas Aquinas died at the monastery of Fossa Nova on March 7th, 1274. His original feast day was March 7th, the day of his death, but because the date often falls within Lent, in 1969, a revision of the Roman calendar changed his feast day to January 28th. St. Thomas's comments and philosophical writings are still debated today, and his aesthetic theories, such as the concept of claritas, deeply influenced the literary writings of James Joyce and Italian semiotician Umberto Eco. St. Thomas is often depicted with an open book or writing with a quill. Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into our channel, where we share God's love, hope, and truth through inspiring stories, teachings, and creative content. We're so grateful for your support, your likes, your comments, and your prayers. They mean the world to us. As you know, creating high-quality Christian content takes time, resources, and a lot of heart. But here's the reality. We simply can't keep this going on YouTube revenue alone. The ads you see just don't cover the costs of production, editing, and everything else that goes into sharing this message with the world. That's why we're asking for your help. If you believe in what we're doing and want to see this channel continue to grow and reach more people, please consider supporting us through Patreon or PayPal. Even a small contribution makes a big difference. It helps us produce new videos and series, upgrade our equipment for better quality, and most importantly, focus on creating content that uplifts and strengthens your faith. You can join our mission by visiting our Patreon page or making a one-time donation via PayPal. The links are in the description below. Together, we can continue spreading God's Word to a world that desperately needs hope. Thank you for your prayers, your support, and for being part of this community. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video. Saint Joan of Arc, whose feast day is May 30th, inspired the French in battle against the English in the 15th century and was subsequently executed as a heretic. But who was this illiterate French peasant girl who in 15 months changed the history of Western Europe and became, according to one historian, the most widely known of all medieval women? Joan was born into the midst of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that actually lasted 116 years, from 1337 to 1453. On January 6, 1412, Joan of Arc was born to pious parents of the French peasant class in a small village named Domremy near the province of Lorraine. Her father was a farmer who owned a small piece of land. Joan's 3 brothers helped their father on the farm, while Joan helped her mother at home. She was not taught to read or write, but her pious mother, Isabelle Romay, instilled in her a deep love for the Catholic Church and its teachings. Never wandering far from home, Joan took care of the animals and became quite skilled as a seamstress. When Joan was about 13 years old, she began receiving visions of Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret the Virgin. In 1424, when Joan was only 12 years old, the great miracle of her life unfolded. One summer day, in her father's garden, she heard a mysterious voice which was accompanied by a bright light. At first, they gave her simple messages. Do good, they told her. Don't forget to go to church. Slowly, Joan began to recognize them. One was the Archangel Michael, the leader of God's armies. And with him were Saint Margaret of Antioch and Saint Catherine of Alexandria. As she recognized them, their bodies began to change. Instead of just telling her to be good, they told her that she was destined to play a part in a vast drama. It was her job, they told her, to lead the French army against the English.
I don't know anything about war.
That doesn't matter, the voices told her. This is God's will. After their messages were delivered and the saints departed, Joan cried.
They were so beautiful.
As part of this divine mission, Joan took a vow of chastity. At the age of 16, after her father attempted to arrange a marriage for her, she successfully convinced him that she should not be forced to marry. By the time she was 16, she approached a local garrison commander and told him that she wanted to meet the king. He flatly ordered, "Give her a good slapping and take her back to her father," and sent her home. Joan returned home that day sadly. But one day, she received another vision from the angels. The angel told her to visit the garrison once again and deliver the message that the French army would lose the Battle of Rouvray. The Battle of Rouvray was being fought far away, and everyone in France expected their army to win this. Nobody knew what had happened there yet, because the messengers from the battle hadn't arrived yet.
The French have lost the Battle of Rouvray. You need to take me to the king.
The garrison didn't trust Joan yet, and he waited for the messengers to arrive. The messengers arrived the next day. The battle at Rouvray had been a disaster for the French. There was no way on earth Joan could have known that, but somehow she did. He concluded she had seen them losing by divine revelation, which caused him to believe her words. He gave her the permission to meet the King Charles. To reach the king's palace, Joan would have to travel through a hostile territory for many days. Garrison gave her a horse and 2 escorts to assist her in the journey. Joan cropped her hair and dressed in men's clothes for her 11-day journey across enemy territory to Chinon. After many days of journey, Joan arrived at her destination. The king, Charles, wasn't eager to meet with this strange girl when she arrived. He kept Joan waiting for 2 days. Then he put on a disguise of his own so she wouldn't be able to tell that he was the king when she came into court. But despite the fact that the room was full of people and Charles wasn't dressed as a king, Joan walked right up to him. The two had a private conversation, during which, it is said, Joan revealed details of a solemn prayer Charles had made to God to save France. Still tentative, Charles had prominent theologians examine her. The clergymen reported they found nothing improper with Joan, only piety, chastity, and humility. Finally, Charles allowed the 17-year-old Joan of Arc to take part in the battle. Charles gave Joan a horse and a suit of white armor. He also provided a special standard bearing the names Jesus and Mary. He tried to give her a sword as well, but the voices that spoke in Joan's mind told her not to take it. There, just as the voices had said, Joan found a buried sword. Joan rode to the battle dressed in armor along with the soldiers. During the 5 months prior to Joan's arrival in Orleans, the French had only attempted one offensive assault, which resulted in their defeat. But after her arrival, things began to change. During the battle for the fort of Les Tourelles, Joan was wounded. She quickly returned to the fight, carrying the banner, and her courage and bravery inspired the French soldiers. In one of the visions before, Joan had foreseen the victory of the French army. And just as the visions predicted, 9 days after Joan took the field, the English fled and the French won the battle in Orleans. Several noblemen claimed she greatly affected the soldiers, as they accepted she was giving divinely inspired advice. Her renown spread. She was perhaps the most famous person in Europe. Joan urged the immediate coronation of the king, but the French leaders dragged their feet. Finally, however, at Reims in July 1429, Charles VII was anointed King of France. The Maid of Orleans stood triumphantly at his side. Joan had accomplished her mission, but once the king was crowned, he wasn't as eager to listen to Joan. Without the backing of the king, Joan was unable to get the support she needed to fight the war. In May 1430, an Anglo-Burgundian force laid siege to the town of Compiègne. Joan, with no more than a few hundred men, rushed to its aid. Her voices had told her a few months before that she would soon be captured by the English, but she went to the town's defense anyways. The Anglo-Burgundian force was far larger than her own, and she tried her best to defeat them. But in a few days, the enemy chased her small army away. Although most of her soldiers managed to escape, Joan herself was captured by the enemy troops. The English were thrilled to discover that they had Joan in their clutches. But she didn't make it easy for them. She made several attempts to escape from the prison. When they put her in a 70-foot tower, she jumped out of it. But each time she escaped, the English captured her again, until they finally put her on trial in the town of Rouen. They could not execute Joan for winning, but they could impose capital punishment for sorcery or heresy. For several months, she was chained in a cell in the castle at Rouen, where cruel guards constantly taunted her. In the meantime, King Charles VII did almost nothing to secure her release. At her trial, the church judges, who were English, tried to trick her with difficult theological questions. "Are you in God's grace?" they asked her. Joan couldn't say yes, because no one can claim that they know what God thinks. And she couldn't say no, because then she would condemn herself.
If I'm not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there.
Joan baffled them with her answers. But even after this, they condemned her to die at the stake. Joan was charged with heresy, witchcraft, and dressing like a man. Yes, that last charge alleged that Joan's cross-dressing violated divine law. The first time the soldiers led her out to be killed, Joan's courage failed in the public square. Had it really been God who spoke to her? Did she believe in what she had heard enough to die?
I take it all back. Just don't kill me.
3 days later, however, she was found wearing men's clothes again, and when asked about it, she said the voices of Catherine and Margaret had censured her for her treason. They decided that she had fallen back into error. Joan, her strength renewed, declared that God had truly commissioned her and that her voices had come from Him. So, just 7 days after her trial, when Joan was only 19 years old, she was tied to a pillar in the marketplace, wearing a long white dress. She knelt and prayed for her enemies, then asked 2 priests to hold a crucifix for her to see. She then mounted the prepared pyre. As the fire was lit and spread, she uttered her last words. She said,
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus,
repeating Christ's name several times before her death. And as the fire engulfed her, an English soldier saw a white bird rise up out of the pyre. Her ashes were scattered in the Seine River. The 100 Years' War would drag on, but Joan's martyrdom helped spur the French to eventually drive the English out of most of France. Charles VII perhaps feeling some well-deserved guilt, procured a trial review years later that nullified Joan's guilty verdict. After 25 years, the Church Commission overturned the charges against her and declared her innocent. In 1920, Joan, remembered for her heroism and devotion far more than her military and political conquests, was canonized a saint by the Roman Catholic Church.